Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about when it's time for your venture-backed startup to hire its first salesperson. We're going to talk about at what point you should think about outsourcing sales or bringing in someone to do the sales for you. We're going to talk about the level at which you should hire someone in, and we're going to talk about a few of the other nuances that just come in when you're hiring for this role. Before we kick into it, who am I? What do I know? My name is Sam Marelich. I run a recruiting agency called Next Venture. I've been recruiting salespeople for venture-backed startups since 2016, and I've probably made 20, 25 of these hires. I've seen it play out a lot of times, and I've watched a lot of people, frankly, make bad decisions when it comes to hiring in this role. I don't want that to be you. So let's crack in. The first thing, if you're a CEO, if you're a founder, you have a unique ability to close deals that salespeople simply don't, especially in the early stages of selling your product. You might be objectively worse at sales. You might think, hey, technical, I just don't have the background. It doesn't matter. The customers trust you. You have an additional level of credibility, and you need to be taking full advantage of that. Because the flip side of that is if you as the CEO, if you as the founder aren't able to get any sales on your own, it's really unlikely that a salesperson is going to be able to. The question of when should you bring in a salesperson, there are a few different answers to this. The general range that I give to people is somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million in annual recurring revenue. Look, if you're at $380,000, it's probably fine to bring in a salesperson. If you're at $600,000, you're definitely fine to bring on a salesperson. But if you're at $50,000, you're probably not going to be in a good spot to bring on a salesperson. The reality is a CEO's job is a sales job. If you're going to grow your business, you're going to be constantly selling. You're selling to your investors, you're selling to the candidates you want to hire, and you're selling to your customers. I was recently talking to an investor I know, a founder who had a very successful exit. And we were talking about a company he was, familiar with that recently raised $20 or $25 million in 2023 at a $100 million valuation. And they were at $50,000 in revenue. They'd just hired their first salesperson. And what they'd done is they'd hired a strong account executive. They'd given this person a VP of sales title, but they're at $50,000 in revenue. They don't have a predictable machine yet, and they're probably going to burn $3 or $4 million, waste a couple of years while they figure that out. So it's a terrible, terrible mistake to make if you're doing that sort of thing. Let's talk about the level at which you should be hiring a salesperson. There are really three levels to look at here. You can hire an SDR, you can hire an account executive, you can hire a VP of sales. The way to think about an SDR is the SDR's job is to drum up interest in your product, right? Their job is to really get demos booked on the calendar. An account executive's job includes that, but they're also there to handhold the customer and bring in the revenue, ultimately do that selling. And then a VP of sales, they're really a sales manager. When it comes to the actual cost, SDRs aren't that much less expensive than account executives. They're a lot less useful. So an SDR tends to require a lot more training. They require a lot more hand-holding. And frankly, the outputs that you get from a successful SDR, in the best case scenario, is a whole lot of booked demos as opposed to actual revenue. The cost of an SDR, it's about $10,000 a month. That assumes that you're paying someone $60,000 a year as a base salary. You're paying them another $20,000 a year in variable compensation, which again is not going to have any correlation to income that comes in, unlike a salesperson. It's going to be based on demos booked. And then by the time you pay for their tools, by the time you pay for their health insurance and other various employment taxes, you're looking at about $10,000 a month. An account executive is a couple $1,000s more, not a significant amount more, and they can do so much more. A VP of sales doesn't usually make sense until you've already got a few account executives and it's time to build a team. Usually, once you've got a VP of sales and you've got 3, 4, 5 people, you're at $1 million plus in revenue per year. I always say to people who say, oh, maybe our first sales hire should be a VP of sales. The question I always have for them is, are you comfortable spending $1.5 million, $2 million over the next 18 months or so building your sales team? Because that's what a VP sales is going to cost by the time you pay for them, by the time you hire out their team and they're actually useful for you. Now, if this is your second startup and you've already got a playbook, you can disregard what I'm saying. This is really advice for, first-time founders who are still working a lot of this stuff out. When it comes to, the way that venture-backed startups work, Jason Lemkin and SaaStr are some of the best resources you can find online. I highly recommend you take a look at the website. But they've got a playbook, and part of that playbook is that you hire 2 salespeople. So the idea behind why you should hire 2 salespeople is that you get a reference point. If you only have 1 rep and they do really well, you don't know why. If 1 rep does really badly, you don't know why. That's the peril of the 1 sales rep, is you don't know because you don't have a control test. You're not doing an A/B test. And this drags everything out 3, 4, 5, 6 months while you figure things out. The other downside of only having 1 sales rep is that sales is a competitive sport. It's the most competitive department in most companies. It's the one department where everyone objectively knows the performance of their peers. And, there is a competitive element that's sparked with that. So you can really take advantage of that by hiring 2 people. Something that comes up, and it's quite a natural thing, is hiring someone who's a quota killer, someone who's got a fantastic resume backed up by year over year over year of fantastic performance. Obviously, it's good to have people that have hit really good numbers. That's somewhat self-evident, but there is some nuance here. The best salesperson at a big company is often not the best salesperson for a small company. You have to be asking, was this person good, or was their territory, their product, and their account list right? This is not to dig on big company salespeople. They are very talented. But often what makes them quite talented is the resource, is the brand of the big company. And again, this is not saying that you shouldn't hire them, but often you just need to be more stage aware as to where they're at. One of the things that comes with being really good at overachieving in a big company is taking on less risk. So you look at the guy who's hit 120% to plan for the last 3 years, and if you look at that person, they might objectively look better at someone who hit, say, 85% year 1 and 105% year 2 and 110% year 3. But if that second person spearheaded a new product or a new territory, they're actually going to be a lot more appropriate for an early stage startup. Now, one of the nice things about this is you can often ferret this out quite quickly. I find it's usually on the first call. People who come from this more risk-averse, big company attitude often ask things like, how much support are they going to get? How big's the territory? What's the win ratio? How many demos do they have to be on in order to close a deal, sort of thing. Whereas small, people that are right for small companies are excited about coming in and building a playbook. So just something to be aware of, but it is also something you should be able to figure out pretty early on in the qualification process. That's really all that I have today. But if you enjoyed this, if you'd like to talk more about sales, if you'd like to talk more about recruiting, follow me on Twitter. My handle is @SamMaralich. Go onto my website, www.yournextventure.co. I've got a video there. Also, feel free to book a time. We can talk about hiring your first salesperson. We can talk about growing your sales team or hiring your first salesperson in the US.